You know, we talk about miracles like they're ancient history, like they only happened in Bible times, like they're stories we read but don't really expect to see. But let me tell you something. God is still a miracle-working God. He hasn't retired. He hasn't run out of power. What he did before, he can do again. Maybe you're going through something right now and you're thinking, I don't see a way out. Well, guess what? You don't have to see the way, because God is the way. He can open doors that no one can shut. He can turn situations around in ways you never expected. But here's the key. Faith activates miracles. You know, sometimes we act like miracles are something that only happen in Bible times. We read about the Red Sea parting, blind eyes opening, the dead being raised, and we think, wow, that must have been amazing. But deep down, we wonder, does God still do that today? Let me tell you something. God has not changed. The same God who split the sea, fed thousands with a little boy's lunch, and made the lame walk is the same God who is working in our lives right now. His power hasn't run out. His miracles haven't stopped. And he is just as present today as he was back then. The Bible says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13:8. That means if he did miracles before, he can do them again. And not just for people in the Bible, not just for people on TV, but for you. That's right, you, in your situation, in your struggle, in your need. See, we often believe in miracles for other people, but when it comes to our own lives, we hesitate. We say things like, well, I know God can do it, but I'm not sure he will. Or maybe I don't deserve a miracle. Listen, a miracle isn't about what we deserve. It's about God's goodness. It's about his love and his power. If you believe God did miracles in the past, you need to believe he's still doing them today. One of the biggest tricks of the enemy is to make you think that God has stopped working, that what you're facing is too big, too hard, too far gone. But nothing, absolutely nothing, is too hard for God. He doesn't get tired. He doesn't say, I've done enough miracles, I think I'll take a break. No, he is constantly working, constantly moving, constantly making a way. Think about it. How many times have you faced something that seemed impossible, but somehow things worked out? You didn't know how you were going to pay that bill, but suddenly unexpected provision showed up. You thought you lost that opportunity, but then a door opened that was even better. You were sure that situation wouldn't change, but somehow it did. That wasn't coincidence. That was God still working miracles in your life. The problem is we get used to seeing miracles in small ways, and we stop recognizing them as miracles. We think miracles have to be something dramatic, fire falling from heaven, the blind receiving sight. But what about the fact that you woke up this morning? What about that time God protected you from something you didn't even know about? What about the healing that took time, but you're still here, still standing, still strong? That's a miracle. See, sometimes miracles happen instantly, but other times they happen little by little. We love the idea of sudden miracles where God snaps his fingers and everything changes overnight. And yes, he does that. But sometimes the miracle is in the process. Sometimes he takes us on a journey of faith, stretching us, teaching us, growing us, until we look back and say, wow, I didn't even realize it, but God has been working all along. We also have to remember that miracles don't always happen the way we expect. If you look through the Bible, Jesus never healed people the same way twice. One time he spoke a word and someone was healed. Another time he made mud and put it on a blind man's eyes. One woman just touched the hem of his garment and received her miracle. If you're waiting on God, don't box him in with your expectations. Be open to the fact that he might do something completely different than what you had in mind, but it will still be good. And let me just say this. Miracles are not just about what God does for you, but what he does in you. Sometimes the biggest miracle is not when your circumstances change, but when you change. When you go through a storm and instead of being anxious, you have peace. When you're facing a challenge and instead of giving up, you have supernatural strength. When you've been hurt and instead of holding on to bitterness, you're able to forgive. That is a miracle. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that miracles are just a thing of the past. Don't let the enemy convince you that God has stopped moving. He is still in the miracle working business. And if you trust him, if you keep believing, if you stay in faith, you will see his hand in ways you never imagined. You know, we love to talk about miracles. We love to hear stories about how God turned situations around, how he made a way where there was no way. But here's something we need to understand. Miracles don't just happen randomly. Faith activates miracles. All throughout the Bible, we see this truth in action. Jesus never said, my power has healed you. Over and over again, he said, your faith has made you whole. Why? Because faith is what moves the hand of God. Faith is what opens the door for miracles to take place in our lives. Faith is not just believing that God can do something. It's believing that he will. It's standing firm even when everything around you says otherwise. It's trusting that even when you don't see a way, God already has a way. A lot of people are waiting for a miracle before they believe. They think, well, when I see the breakthrough, then I'll have faith. But that's not how it works. Faith comes first. Faith believes before the miracle happens. It's easy to believe after the fact, when the prayer has been answered, when the situation has changed. But real faith says, God, I trust you even before I see it. Think about the woman with the issue of blood in the Bible. She had been sick for 12 years. She had spent all her money on doctors and nothing worked. But when she heard about Jesus, something in her rose up. She said, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, I will be healed. That was faith. She didn't say, I hope this works. She didn't say, maybe I'll get lucky. No, she said, I will be healed. And the moment she reached out in faith, the power of God flowed into her body, and she was instantly healed. Now, Jesus could have just healed her without her doing anything, but he didn't. He told her, your faith has made you whole. Her faith activated the miracle. The same thing happened with blind Bartimaeus. He was sitting by the roadside, and when he heard that Jesus was passing by, he started shouting, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. People around him tried to shut him up. They told him to be quiet, but he wouldn't let go of his faith. He shouted even louder. And what did Jesus do? He stopped. He called Bartimaeus over and asked, what do you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus said, Lord, I want to see. And Jesus told him, go, your faith has healed you. Did you catch that? Jesus didn't say, my power has healed you. He didn't say, I decided to heal you just because. He said, your faith has healed you. So many people are sitting around waiting for a miracle, waiting for God to move. But here's the question. Where is your faith? Are you just hoping or are you believing? Are you waiting for proof or are you stepping out in faith before you see it? Faith isn't passive. Faith takes action. When God told Abraham he would be the father of many nations, Abraham didn't sit around saying, well, let's see if it happens. No, the Bible says Abraham believed even though he was old, even though it seemed impossible. He believed before there was any evidence. And because he believed, he saw the promise come to pass. The same is true for you. Maybe you're facing an impossible situation right now. Maybe the doctor's giving you a bad report. Maybe your finances are a mess. Maybe you've been praying for something for a long time and nothing seems to be happening. This is where faith comes in. Faith says, I don't care what it looks like. I don't care what the world says. I believe God is still working. Faith speaks life even when things look dead. Faith says, God, I trust you even when I don't understand. That's what activates miracles. That's what causes the power of God to flow into your situation. It's not about how much faith you have. It's about having faith at all. Jesus said, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. You don't need giant faith. You just need to take the faith you have and use it. Faith is what allows you to walk on water when everything around you says you should sink. Faith is what causes walls to fall when they look impossible to bring down. Faith is what brings dead things back to life. When you choose to believe, when you step out in faith, that's when miracles happen. We all want to see miracles. We want God to open doors, bring breakthroughs, heal our bodies, restore our relationships, and do the impossible in our lives. But what many people don't realize is that miracles are often connected to one simple thing: obedience. All throughout the Bible, we see a pattern. Before the miracle happened, there was an act of obedience. God gave an instruction, and when people obeyed, the supernatural took place. It wasn't always easy. It didn't always make sense. But obedience paved the way for the miracle. Think about the story of Naaman in the Old Testament. He was a commander in the Syrian army, a powerful man, but he had leprosy. When he heard that the prophet Elisha could heal him, he went to see him expecting something dramatic. But instead of waving his hand over Naaman and instantly healing him, Elisha sent a message. Go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times and you will be healed. Naaman was offended. He thought, that's it, just wash in the river? I could have done that at home. He almost walked away in anger, but his servants convinced him to obey. And when he dipped in the Jordan the 7th time, his skin was completely restored. The miracle didn't happen because of the water. It happened because of his obedience. God often gives instructions that don't make sense to us. He asks us to take steps of faith before we see the breakthrough. He tests our trust in him. Many times the miracle we are waiting for is on the other side of simple obedience. Look at Peter when he was fishing all night and caught nothing. He was tired, he was frustrated, he had already washed his nets ready to go home. Then Jesus came and said, launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. Now Peter had every reason to say no. He was the professional fisherman. Jesus was a carpenter. He knew how fishing worked, and he knew it wasn't the right time to catch fish. But instead of arguing, he obeyed. He said, because you say so, I will let down the nets. And the moment he obeyed, the miracle happened. The nets filled up so much that they started to break. What if Peter had refused? What if he had said, I don't feel like it, or this doesn't make sense? He would have missed the blessing. The fish weren't the real miracle. The real miracle was that Peter learned what happens when we obey God even when it seems unreasonable. Think about the wedding at Cana where Jesus turned water into wine. When the wine ran out, Jesus told the servants to fill 6 stone jars with water. Now, if you were a servant, you might have thought, this is ridiculous. We need wine, not water. But they didn't argue, they simply obeyed. And as they poured, the water turned into the finest wine. What if they had refused? What if they had tried to figure it out logically instead of just doing what Jesus said? The miracle would never have happened. So many times we pray for a miracle, but we're unwilling to obey what God is telling us to do. We want the blessing without the obedience, but the two go hand in hand. Maybe you've been asking God for financial provision, and he's prompting you to be generous, to give even when it doesn't make sense. Maybe you're praying for a breakthrough in your relationships, but he's asking you to forgive someone. Maybe you're asking for a new opportunity, and he's nudging you to step out in faith even though you feel unqualified. God's instructions don't always align with our logic, but they always lead to his power. When the Israelites were facing the walls of Jericho, God didn't tell them to fight. He told them to walk around the walls for 7 days and then shout. That didn't make any military sense, but they obeyed. And on the 7th day, the walls collapsed. Obedience is the key to unlocking the miraculous. It's not always easy. It's not always comfortable. But when we trust God enough to do what he says, even when we don't understand, we position ourselves for the supernatural. One of the hardest things for us to accept is waiting on God's timing. We live in a world where everything is instant. We want fast answers, quick results, and immediate breakthroughs. But God doesn't operate on our schedule. His timing is perfect, even when it doesn't match our expectations. So many times we pray and expect things to happen right away. When they don't, we start questioning. Did God hear me? Did I do something wrong? Why is it taking so long? But what we don't realize is that delays are not denials. Just because you don't see anything happening doesn't mean God isn't working behind the scenes. Look at the story of Lazarus. His sisters Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus saying, Lord, the one you love is sick. They expected Jesus to come immediately. They knew he had the power to heal, and they believed he would rush to help. But what did Jesus do? He stayed where he was for 2 more days. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had already been dead for 4 days. Mary and Martha were devastated. They said, Lord, if you had been here, our brother wouldn't have died. In other words, you're too late. But Jesus wasn't late. He was right on time. See, they wanted healing, but Jesus had something bigger in mind. He didn't just want to heal Lazarus. He wanted to raise him from the dead. If Jesus had come when they asked, they would have seen a healing. But because he waited, they got to witness a resurrection. Sometimes what we think is a delay is really God setting us up for something greater. We're asking for small things when God is preparing something bigger than we can imagine. Look at Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a son, but they had to wait 25 years before Isaac was born. Can you imagine how hard that must have been? Year after year they waited. They probably wondered, did we hear God wrong? Maybe he changed his mind. But God hadn't forgotten. He was working according to his perfect timing. And when the time was right, when everything was in place, the promise came to pass. If Isaac had been born earlier, it wouldn't have been the miracle that God intended, but because they had to wait, his birth was a testimony of God's faithfulness. Maybe you're waiting for something right now. Maybe you've been praying for a breakthrough, for healing, for restoration, and nothing seems to be changing. Let me remind you, God is never early and he's never late. He is always right on time. Sometimes the waiting season is where God does his greatest work in us. He uses it to strengthen our faith, to teach us patience, to refine our character. If we received everything instantly, we wouldn't learn to trust him. Think about Joseph. He had a dream that one day he would be a great leader. But before that dream came to pass, he went through years of trials. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. It seemed like everything was going wrong. But through it all, God was preparing him. When the right time came, Joseph was promoted from the prison to the palace in a single day. If he had been released too soon, he wouldn't have been ready for what God had planned. The waiting wasn't wasted. It was part of the process. We have to remind ourselves that God sees the full picture. We only see a small piece of the puzzle, but he knows exactly what he's doing. If he's making you wait, it's because he has a reason. Maybe he's protecting you from something you can't see. Maybe he's waiting for the perfect conditions. Maybe he's aligning things in ways you don't understand. But one thing is certain, when the time is right, nothing can stop what God has planned for you. So instead of getting frustrated in the waiting, choose to trust him. Choose to believe that his timing is always better than yours. Choose to rest in the fact that he is never late and he will never fail you. When we think of miracles, we often picture dramatic, life-changing events. The blind receiving sight, the dead being raised, impossible situations turning around in an instant. And while those are incredible displays of God's power, the truth is, miracles aren't just about big moments. Miracles happen all around us every single day. They may not always be flashy, but they are just as real. The fact that you woke up this morning, that your heart is still beating, that you have breath in your lungs, that's a miracle. The way your body heals itself after a sickness, the way a door opens at just the right time, the way you receive peace in the middle of chaos, those are miracles too. Sometimes we're so focused on looking for the big dramatic miracles that we miss the everyday ones. We think if God really worked a miracle in my life, it would look like this. But what if he's already working just in a way you didn't expect? Look at the story of Elijah. He was hiding in a cave, desperate to hear from God. And then a powerful wind came. But God wasn't in the wind. Then an earthquake shook the ground. But God wasn't in the earthquake. Then a fire blazed through. But God wasn't in the fire. Finally, a gentle whisper came, and that's where God was. See, we expect God to show up in dramatic ways, but sometimes his greatest miracles happen in the quiet, in the small moments, in ways we least expect. Think about how Jesus performed miracles. Yes, he did incredible things. He walked on water, fed thousands with a few loaves and fish, raised people from the dead, but he also worked miracles in the ordinary moments. He met a woman at a well and gave her living water. Not a big public display, but a quiet transformation of her heart. He saw Zacchaeus, a tax collector, up in a tree and called him down, not with thunder from the sky, but with a simple invitation that changed his life forever. Even when he multiplied the bread and fish, he didn't just make food appear out of thin air. He took what was already there, blessed it, and multiplied it. And that's what he still does today. He takes what we have and turns it into more than enough. So many times we overlook the small miracles because they don't seem big enough. We think miracles have to be obvious, instant, and overwhelming. But what if the miracle is the fact that you made it through another tough day? What if the miracle is that God gave you strength to keep going when you felt like giving up? What if the miracle is that he is shifting things in your favor little by little, even when you can't see it yet? When the Israelites were in the wilderness, God didn't drop a feast in front of them all at once. He gave them manna, just enough for each day. That was a miracle, even though it didn't seem like much at the time. Every morning, fresh provision appeared. They didn't go hungry. God sustained them, not with a grand display, but with a daily Maybe you're waiting for something huge to happen in your life. Maybe you're praying for a breakthrough and wondering why nothing dramatic has taken place. But could it be that God is already working just in a way you're not recognizing? Maybe the miracle isn't that the storm disappears instantly, but that God is giving you peace in the middle of it. Maybe the miracle isn't that everything changes overnight, but that he is strengthening you day by day. Maybe the miracle isn't something you can see yet, but when you look back, you'll realize he was working all along. Miracles aren't just about big, spectacular moments. They are in the little things, the everyday moments, the quiet ways God shows up in your life. If you open your eyes, you'll start to see that he is working miracles all around you. One step at a time, one day at a time. One of the greatest weapons the enemy uses against us is doubt. He knows that if he can get you to stop believing in miracles, you will stop expecting them. And if you stop expecting them, you won't recognize them when they happen, or worse, you won't position yourself to receive them. From the very beginning, Satan's strategy has been to plant doubt in people's hearts. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent didn't attack Eve with force, he attacked her mind. He said, did God really say? He made her question what she already knew to be true. And that's exactly what he does to us today. The enemy whispers, did God really say he would heal you? Did God really say he would provide? Did God really say he would make a way? And if we listen to those doubts long enough, we start to believe them. When you pray for something and don't see results right away, the enemy is quick to jump in. See, God isn't going to do it for you. He does miracles for other people, but not for you. He wants you to focus on what hasn't happened yet instead of trusting God's timing. This is why the Bible tells us to guard our hearts and take every thought captive. Because if the enemy can steal your belief in miracles, he can steal your hope, your faith, and your confidence in God. Look at the Israelites. They saw miracle after miracle. God parted the Red Sea, rained down manna from heaven, made water flow from a rock. Yet, the moment things got difficult, they started doubting again. They let the enemy plant fear in their hearts. Instead of trusting God, they said, did God bring us out here to die? That's what happens when you let doubt take root. You forget what God has already done. The enemy wants you to focus so much on your current problem that you forget how many times God has come through for you before. Think about Peter walking on water. As long as his eyes were on Jesus, he did the impossible. But the moment he looked at the wind and the waves, the moment he focused on the problem instead of the promise, he started to sink. That's exactly what the enemy wants. He wants to distract you with the storm so you'll forget that the same God who called you out onto the water is the one who can hold you up. And the truth is, the enemy knows that as long as you believe in miracles, you're dangerous. Why? Because faith moves mountains. When you believe that God can do the impossible, you won't back down in fear. You won't settle for less than what God has for you. You won't let circumstances dictate your faith. That's why he fights so hard to make you doubt. If he can steal your belief in miracles, he can keep you from stepping into the fullness of what God has for you. We see this even in Jesus' hometown. The Bible says that Jesus could not do many miracles there because of their unbelief. It's not that he lost his power. It's that they refused to believe, and their doubt blocked the blessing that was available to them. This is why you have to be intentional about protecting your faith. The enemy will use circumstances, delays, disappointments, and even other people's negativity to make you question whether God is still a miracle-working God. But you have to stand firm. Remind yourself of what God has already done in your life. Think back to the times he made a way, the times he provided, the times he came through when it seemed impossible. If he did it before, he can do it again. The enemy wants you to believe that miracles are rare, that they only happen to certain people, or that they stopped happening a long time ago. But the truth is, God is still in the miracle-working business. You just have to keep believing, keep expecting, and keep trusting that he is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you ask or imagine. It's easy to believe in miracles when everything is going well, when prayers are answered quickly, when doors open without resistance, when life is smooth and predictable. But what about when you're facing a challenge so big, so overwhelming, that you don't see a way out? What if I told you that some of the greatest miracles God will ever do in your life will first show up as obstacles, trials, and difficulties. See, we often pray for miracles, expecting them to come wrapped in ease and comfort. But God's miracles are often disguised as challenges. They don't always come in a way we expect. They come through struggles, through tests, through moments when we feel like we're being stretched beyond our limit. Look at the Israelites when they stood before the Red Sea. They had just been freed from Egypt, and now Pharaoh's army was chasing them down. In front of them was an impossible obstacle, and behind them was an army ready to destroy them. In their eyes, this wasn't a miracle, it was a crisis. But what they couldn't see was that their biggest challenge was about to become one of the greatest miracles in history. When Moses stretched out his staff, God parted the sea. What looked like an impossible situation was actually the setup for a supernatural breakthrough. If there had been no Red Sea, there would have been no miracle. And that's the way God works. He doesn't just remove obstacles, he transforms them into the very thing that reveals his power. Think about David. Before he ever became king, he faced Goliath, a giant who seemed undefeatable. To everyone else, Goliath was a death sentence. But for David, that giant was a doorway to destiny. If there had been no Goliath, there would have been no opportunity for David to step into his calling. See, sometimes the very thing you think is holding you back is actually what God is using to propel you forward. The problem isn't the problem. The problem is how you see it. If you only see the difficulty, you'll miss the miracle that's hidden inside it. Look at the disciples when they were caught in the storm. They were in the boat being tossed by the wind and waves, terrified for their lives, but in the middle of that storm, Jesus came walking on the water. What they saw as a disaster, Jesus used as an opportunity to reveal his power in a way they had never seen before. If there had been no storm, they wouldn't have witnessed the miracle. What if the challenge you're facing right now isn't meant to break you, but to reveal God's power in a new way? What if the very thing you're praying for God to remove is the thing he's going to use to show you his glory? The enemy wants you to see challenges as roadblocks, as proof that God isn't with you. But in reality, challenges are often the very places where God does his greatest work. Think about the feeding of the 5,000. The disciples saw a shortage, a problem with no solution, but Jesus saw an opportunity for a miracle. He took what little they had, just 5 loaves and 2 fish, and multiplied it until there was more than enough. The challenge wasn't a lack of food. It was an opportunity for God to show that he is the provider. God often allows challenges not to harm us, but to stretch our faith, to prepare us for what's next, and to bring us into a deeper dependence on him. If everything were easy, we wouldn't need to trust him. But when we face trials, we get to see firsthand that he is our provider, our protector, our healer, and our waymaker. Maybe right now, you're facing something that seems too big for you. Maybe you feel stuck, overwhelmed, or like there's no way forward. But what if, instead of asking God to take away the challenge, you asked him to show you the miracle hidden inside it? What if this isn't a setback, but a setup? What if the Red Sea in front of you is about to part? What if the giant you're facing is actually your path to promotion? What if the storm around you is about to become the very thing that reveals God's power in your life like never before? God's miracles are often disguised as challenges, but if you keep trusting, keep believing, and keep your eyes on him, you'll see that what looked like an obstacle was actually an open door all along. There's something powerful about expectation. When you truly believe that something is coming, you start preparing for it, watching for it, and positioning yourself to receive it. And right now, no matter what it looks like, your miracle is on the way. The enemy wants you to think that because you haven't seen it yet, it's not happening. He'll whisper, if God was really going to do it, wouldn't it have happened by now? He'll try to plant seeds of doubt, fear, and discouragement, hoping you'll give up before your breakthrough comes. But let me remind you, God's delays are not his denials. Just because you don't see anything happening doesn't mean God isn't working behind the scenes. Think about Daniel. He prayed and fasted, seeking an answer from God. For 21 days, nothing happened. But what Daniel didn't know was that the moment he prayed, God had already sent the answer. The angel who was bringing his miracle was delayed by spiritual warfare. Daniel could have given up, thinking his prayer wasn't heard. But on the 21st day, the angel arrived saying, from the first day that you set your heart to understand, your words were heard. See, the answer was on the way the whole time. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean the miracle isn't in progress. Look at Elijah. He prayed for rain in the middle of a drought. He sent his servant out to check the sky. Nothing. He prayed again, still nothing. 6 times he prayed and saw no sign of an answer. But on the 7th time, the servant came back and said, I see a cloud as small as a man's hand rising from the sea. That tiny cloud didn't look like much, but it was the beginning of a downpour. What if Elijah had stopped praying on the 6th time? What if he had said, well, I guess it's just not God's will? So many people give up right before the breakthrough. They let go right before the miracle arrives. Maybe you've been praying for a long time. Maybe you've been standing in faith, but you're growing weary because you don't see the evidence yet. Don't stop believing now. Your miracle is on the way. Think about the woman with the issue of blood. She had been suffering for 12 years. She had spent everything she had looking for a cure. But when she heard about Jesus, something rose up inside her. So she didn't let the crowd stop her. She didn't let the years of disappointment keep her from pressing forward. She reached out, touched the hem of his garment, and in an instant her miracle came. She could have stayed home that day thinking, I've been dealing with this for too long. What's the point of trying? But she did. Maybe your situation has been going on for a long time. Maybe you've been waiting so long that you've started to wonder if your miracle's ever coming. But let me remind you, delay is not denial. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he didn't rush to heal him right away. He waited. And by the time he arrived, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Everyone thought it was too late. They said, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. But what they didn't understand was that Jesus was about to do something even greater than they had imagined. He wasn't just going to heal Lazarus. He was going to resurrect him. Sometimes the delay isn't a denial. It's a setup for something bigger. Maybe you've been praying for a door to open, and it seems like nothing is happening. But what if God isn't just opening a door? What if he's preparing a whole new level of blessing? What if the thing that seems delayed is actually being positioned for the perfect moment? God is never late. He's never behind schedule. Your miracle is on the way. Not a second too soon and not a second too late. What he has spoken over your life will come to pass. In the meantime, keep believing, keep praying, keep expecting. Your miracle isn't just coming, it's already in motion. The same God who parted the Red Sea, who healed the sick, who raised the dead, is still moving today. And what he has planned for you is greater than anything you could ever imagine.